Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into some of the most iconic movies ever made, all to ask one simple question. What do these films really tell us about ourselves?
I mean, it sounds simple, right? But the answer? Well, it tells us a ton about who we are. Is a classic movie just old? Is it just super popular? Or is there something, deeper going on?
Well, lucky for us, the American Film Institute gave us a pretty solid answer with their incredible 10 top 10 lists. And get this, they didn't just pull these out of thin air. They asked over 1,500 industry experts to pick the greatest American movies across 10 classic genres.
But here's the thing, these lists are so much more than just a who's number one debate. They're basically a map, a cultural map. If you trace how these genres change over time, you can actually see how American storytelling itself, how it grew up. And by extension, how we grew up. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to explore that journey by looking at 3 key genres that show this evolution perfectly.
All right, let's jump right in with our first genre, animation. And this is the perfect place to start, really, because the journey it takes, from really simple fables to these incredibly complex, emotional stories, it's just so crystal clear.
Just look at this timeline. It shows this huge leap in how stories were told. I mean, we're jumping from 1937 all the way to the 90s and 2000s. And in that time, believe me, the entire DNA of what an animated movie could be was completely rewritten.
And no big surprise here. The movie that tops the AFI's list as the #1 animated film of all time, it's the one that basically started it all, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
And the story? It's the absolute blueprint for a classic fairy tale, right? You've got your innocent princess, your wicked, evil queen, and the whole conflict gets wrapped up neatly with a kiss from a handsome prince. It's all about outside forces, just straight up good versus evil.
Okay, and this right here really nails the evolution. The fundamental questions the movies are asking, they changed. Back then, the big question was, who is the fairest one of all? Which is all about what other people think, right? External validation. But modern animation, it asks, who am I? Where do I belong? That's a journey of finding yourself.
I mean, think about Toy Story. The bad guy isn't some queen with a poison apple. It's something we can all relate to. That deep internal fear of being replaced, of becoming obsolete. And Buzz Lightyear? The guy has a complete existential crisis when he finds out he's not a real space ranger. These are real human struggles, just told with toys.
Or what about Finding Nemo? The whole story is driven by this messy, complicated, but beautiful relationship between a father and his son. You have an overprotective dad who has to learn to let go, and a son with a disability who has to prove he can make it on his own. That's a story about family, not a fairy tale kingdom.
Okay, so let's switch gears and see how this whole trend of growing complexity plays out in what might be the most American genre there is, the Western. And here, the evolution wasn't just about making things more complex. It was about actively tearing down the very myths the genre was built on.
So this timeline really shows a genre that started looking in the mirror. It began asking some really uncomfortable questions about the heroes it used to celebrate. And this happened right as the country itself was starting to question its own history and its own myths. The movies were reflecting the times.
So what does this all boil down to? It's a total shift in what a hero is. You look at a movie like Shane from 1953, and the hero is, well, he's basically a knight in shining buckskin, a clear-cut good guy. Then you jump ahead to Unforgiven in 1992. The hero, William Money, is a former killer who's haunted by his past, and he's not taking this last job for glory or justice. He's doing it for the money.
And sitting right in the middle of this evolution, and by the way, ranked #1 on the AFI's list of best westerns, is John Ford's masterpiece, The Searchers.
This film, you guys, is the turning point. Its hero, Ethan Edwards, is on this noble quest to save his niece. But what's driving him? It's this chilling, obsessive hatred. There's this one line where he talks about women who were captured by the Comanche, and he says, "They ain't white anymore." And in that moment, you realize you are not watching a simple hero. You're watching a complex, dangerously flawed man. And after that, the Western was just never the same.
All right, for our last genre, let's look at the one that's supposed to be all about happily ever after, the romantic comedy. We're going to see how it decided that, you know what, maybe the most interesting part of the story isn't the perfect ending.
The journey of the rom-com is pretty wild. It takes us from this perfect, witty formula to something way more realistic, way more messy, and a lot more relatable. It's about how real people, fall in and out of love.
So back in 1934, It Happened One Night basically created the classic template. You know the drill. Opposites attract, they have some hilarious, witty arguments, they overcome some silly obstacle, in this case it was literally a blanket on a rope, and boom, they fall in love. The end. Simple.
But then you get a movie like When Harry Met Sally, and it builds its entire story around this messy, complicated question. Can men and women just be friends? It didn't just assume love was the end game. It questioned the whole foundation of relationships between men and women. And it did it right when those roles were changing in the real world.
And then you've got Annie Hall, which just completely blew up the formula. I mean, think about it. It's a romantic comedy that's mostly about a breakup. Alvy Singer's line about a relationship being like a shark, it has to constantly move forward or it dies, that just perfectly captures what the movie's about. It's about the funny, awkward, and totally realistic reasons that relationships fall apart.
So what's the takeaway here? The genre grew up. It moved past the simple fairy tale and got to something much deeper. At the end of the movie, Alvy Singer has that famous joke where he explains why we put ourselves through all the heartbreak. He says we do it because we need the eggs. It's not a fantasy anymore, it's a necessity. The rom-com started looking at our messy, imperfect need for each other.
So, okay, we've looked at animation, the Western, and the romantic comedy. After going through all that, what have we learned? What do these AFI lists really tell us?
Well, they show a really clear pattern. Across all these genres, American movies grew up. Our stories went from being about simple good versus evil to being about struggles happening inside our characters. Our heroes got more flawed, more complicated, more human. And our love stories? They stopped being perfect fairy tales and started reflecting our own messy, complicated lives. Basically, our movies started to look a lot more like us.
Now, you have to remember, the AFI's lists are a snapshot in time. They were last updated back in 2008. So that leaves us with one last really interesting question to think about. All the films we've talked about, they absolutely define their times. So, what movie from the last 20 years or so do you think is going to end up on a list like this in the future? What film is defining a genre for a whole new generation right now?